Hi, this is Brian from HostelFork.com, and I'm going to show you a little demo here and try and explain Black Highlighter, which is a project of mine that I came up with a few years ago. And I had originally written the server side in Python with Django, and then came back to it and did it in Node.js. But kind of what's cool to look at is the front end. So let's go ahead and go visit the demo deployment on blackhighlighter.org. And I want to thank Nodejitsu for being nice enough to host this for free. They've been pretty reliable about the service, even though they're not being paid for it. And I have a little slideshow here that shows you what it does. It's one of these kind of hard to make, not really a Flash animation, but PNG animation slideshows. And I give some explanations of scenarios that you might use it for. But here I am to walk you through it, so why don't I go ahead and do it manually and talk you through it. So what Black Highlighter is it's a tool for doing redaction. In other words, the ability to write something and then mark out sensitive portions that you might not want to share with just anyone. And yet you have the rest of it that is public. And this is often used in legal scenarios where you have a certain amount of a document that you are being required to disclose, and you don't want to disclose the parts that are important to protect, but you feel that the questions are mostly answered by the unredacted portions. But there's a little bit of a difference in this, so I'm going to show you what that is. Here I am writing a letter to the president, supposedly, and I'll go ahead and finish it up, put my email address in here. We are currently using the Black Highlighter widget in compose mode. And although what you see here is a jQuery UI, a little app that has a number of steps and phases, you recognize these jQuery UI tabs, kind of that's the stock look for them. You don't have to use jQuery UI, because really the widget is just what's in the box here, and the rest of it is just automating the widget through its methods. But currently it's in compose mode, and so what we're going to do is we're going to switch it into protect mode. And I use the word protect instead of redact. That's kind of important because what we're doing here is we are going to be committing cryptographically to the holes that we make in the published document. So I'll try and keep with that theme here as we go. It's looked at our document and kind of noticed that looked like an email address. It's offering us a one-click suggested protection. So I can just click on that and say, yeah, that's something I would like to protect. There's nothing else here really that is all that important to protect, but I'm going to go ahead and do it for demo purposes. And we'll do 4 redactions. Each one of these redactions is independent. You can sort of reveal them either permanently or temporarily on a per run basis. And if I wanted to, I could go back and do some more editing, and it remembers what was what was protected and what wasn't, so that I can go back and get those protections back. It so happens it's very hard to edit and protect at the same time. Not a technical problem I figured out how to do with the HTML content editable text area, but this works well enough. And what I'm going to show you here is something that the Sandbox app lets you do, which is to see what we're going to send to the server. We haven't communicated with the server at all yet. All of what we've been doing here is in your browser client, and so when we protected those certain regions, we put in a cryptographic hash under what's called a bit commitment scheme. So we're kind of committing to what we said without actually providing the material that we have composed. So that's salted and hashed with an SHA-256 cryptographic hash. And you can see that, Brian at HostelFork.com is not in the content. It says my email is, and all it's doing is it's sending the server what the display links should be and what the hash of the content is. So that's done for our redacted portions. Let's go ahead and publish that to the server, and it's done. Now, it published it, but it also gave us this certificate. And the certificate may look fancy. It's not that fancy. It's actually a base 64 encoded JSON message. The reason that it's encoded at all is because it's very difficult to carry long strings in JSON on email, because email gateways will often break lines just like randomly in the middle. You might have noticed this. So you can't reliably carry JSON over email. But that's really just a straightforward message that contains the original text and the salts for the various redactions. And you can see that it's given us a URL of where the letter has been published on a server. And it has a long, funny title, but that long, funny title is a hash of the actual JSON that we sent to the server, so that we can make sure that when our client JavaScript goes to that page, that the person who hosts the letter isn't giving us a bad, a falsified record of what was in the holes. The URL itself, by protocol, helps ensure that we have the right thing. So let's go look at that. And this is something anyone could read here. It's the letter with the redactions in it. And those redactions kind of show up as question marks here. And you can hover over them and see redacted by author and on what date and time. And so philosophically, you might ask, might it give away too much to say how many characters were in the redacted portion if it was some kind of secret? And you're responsible for if you think that it's too short, like, and the murderer was Bob, and you mark out Bob, and that would rule out people with longer names. It's your job to pad that, because really I didn't want any way of making it disproportional so you couldn't really tell how much content had been protected. So it's important. Like you also can't protect across a new line. It will actually split that into two redaction runs, because I don't want the shape of the paper, if you would, to be changed by your redaction, to actually keep the flow and proportionality matching up. So I copied that certificate to the clipboard, so we can now imagine that we were the person who visits this site who has a certificate. And what you would do is you would go down here and say add and remove certificates and paste it. Presumably you got that over email or something. And when you verify it, you're not sending it to the server. Again, this is something that can be done on the browser, and it will tell you if you have an invalid certificate. But in this case, the certificate was valid, and it filled in all the missing portions, and I can read it. And so there's sort of a little bit of a game involved here, right? Because when you send an email to somebody, it's private. They could just go and send it to anyone, even if it was supposed to be private. So in general, when you send information intended to be in confidence, you would hope they don't do that. It's kind of an ethics or protocol thing. But let's just say there's another feature of the server, which is the ability to store revealed information, and that we can also check to make sure that those reveals did fit the initial message. So let's say that I was somebody who was going to reveal this, and I thought it was important to reveal some of these, but not my email address or whatever. And more than likely, the person who would want to reveal something in a black highlighter transaction is going to be the party who sent it, to sort of up the game if they didn't get a response. But so it kind of warns you that you probably shouldn't be doing this, because the sender did publish a bunch of their message, and they called out the part that they didn't want to be published. Which is one of the great things about black highlighter, is that it takes the guesswork out of forwarding by having the people who compose a message mark out the parts that they don't want anyone to read, and then publishing all the rest. That helps you, because you know exactly what they wanted to mark out. Whereas often, if you get a message, you're not sure if you can forward it or not, because the person didn't publish it. So it's about coaxing conversations that would have been completely private into being partially public, and that's how I see redaction as being something that can, instead of being less transparent, be more. But here we see it's blinking red on the things, and it says, you're about to reveal these things, and if you're certain, you can say, yeah, I'm sure. And then the server has a protocol for for storing those. So now we can see if we hover this, it was publicly revealed, and everything is about verification, making sure that you can't forge this, that anything that gets revealed is going to be what was originally written. And so it's all pretty cool, in my opinion. And not just my opinion. Actually, the name comes from The Onion, which had this funny article about the CIA realizes it's been using black highlighters all these years, and that's where I got the name from. And I actually met a guy from The Onion, the technology director guy, Baratunde Thurston, who was there, and I told him about the project. And he's interested in open government and improving government, and especially sort of catalyzing government critique through comedy. So he's pretty cool. And the motivating scenario that I had for originally making this came from a competition from the Sunlight Foundation. And if you know what sunshine laws are, that's just another name for freedom of information laws. The idea that sunlight's the best disinfectant and such of being transparent. And so they had this competition, and the thing that I wanted to enter into the competition was for communicating with congressional representatives, and I called it Concourse. And the concept was that right now, when you write a letter to Congress, you sort of can either write an open letter on your blog, or you can, write a letter, handwrite a letter and send it. It's very important when you write an elected official that you prove to them that you're part of their constituency, because, if you're not even in their district, they probably don't care what you have to say. So if you try to be anonymous and write a congressman, they're going to be even less likely to respond. But this concept was to make it so that there was sort of a clearinghouse for having these single trackable entities that were your correspondence with Congress, and that people could then sort of do data mining on it, or watchdog organizations could look, and people could report how frequently there was follow-up. And this puts accountability on both sides. It puts accountability on the sender and the receiver, because the sender, even though they have marked out parts of their message, can't then later come back and change what was in those hidden portions. It puts sort of a game move on both sides of the communication to reveal the hidden portions if it needs to be. And you can imagine that if there's some issue that's not being followed up on, and some organization is doing keyword searches on the plain text parts of messages, they can start noticing trends, maybe even asking and saying, hey, we're from this official organization. We're very interested in your issue. We would like to have the information in your protected portions. Would you mind sending us the certificate? We won't reveal it. And so it opens up the data. As I said before, previously completely private communications suddenly becoming public. And when I list the scenarios, I kind of run through some of the potential things you might use Black Highlighter for. All of them have kind of a common theme, and that's about taking a kind of an imbalance of power in a communication and evening it up. And I think about things like, when you write, you have an important issue and you write somebody and the buck stops somewhere. Why did it stop there? And we give so much of our communications over to companies like Google for Gmail, or Hotmail or Yahoo, or whoever you trust to carry your messages, and they can do all kinds of data mining on that. And sometimes very interesting things come of that. I mean, Google takes, ostensibly anonymized data and looks for patterns in disease outbreaks and tells the CDC, hey, there's people are reporting these symptoms, and it's happening here. We see this wave of some kind of contagion. There's a lot of really interesting data in our communications, and we must not care that much about the idea that people are mining that. And so if more of our communications that are completely private, that wind up in someone's inbox and just get stuck there because that's where the buck stops, maybe we could open things up a little bit more. And so all the scenarios I'm talking about are about seeing benefit from that and exposing various kinds of corruption or people taking advantage of situations. I mentioned things like job listings. One thing that I know for a fact, because I've worked for companies that have done this, sometimes you'll look at a job ad and you will say, wow, I seem very qualified for this ad that seems to be extremely specific. And you write them, you don't hear anything back, and you wonder why. And sometimes one of the reasons that you don't hear anything back is because they never intended to reply to anyone. They, for instance, might be dealing with immigration, and they have to, sort of on a checklist, prove that they have advertised the job domestically and that they haven't gotten any real candidates. And so you're just spinning your wheels by writing them. If we started agreeing that when you submitted your replies to some kind of job listing, that you did it through one of these sort of redacted but still having enough information in it posts, and that those people weren't actually following up and replying to the mail, then the immigration people could go and look and go, wait a minute, why didn't you reply to this person? And then they could ask you, hey, what was in that missing part? I mean, was there something very condemning that you wouldn't be qualified or what? Because we're doing a serious inquiry into whether they're abusing the system or not. And that's an example of sort of this flipping the inbox, as my friend says. And you take other situations like personal ads, right? There is no punishment to people who put up ads and then never reply. So if instead of carrying out the correspondence completely in secret, there were these additional kind of game moves, if you would, it could be an equalizing force to make things more fair and to also, keep you from just, you can't necessarily just write whatever you want, because if push comes to shove and the information does come out, because of course they could have published the information anyway before, right? But you're saying, hey, it's worth it to bring about some kind of accountability to this communication loop. So most of the scenarios that I talk about are about helping with that kind of communication imbalance. But there's no better place for this, in my opinion, than starting with government organizations. And in fact, the motivating scenario that this came from was I went to an open government meeting, and there was a fair housing advocate who came. And he wasn't a technical person, but he had been kind of dogging the San Francisco Housing Authority, trying to get them to hand over the information that the law basically said they had to make public, and they wouldn't give it to him. So he escalated it to court. And by the time he got to court, what he found out was that there was a certain balance in the law which said that this housing authority didn't have to publish everything because they didn't want to have every bit of their notes, like living in a fishbowl, to the point where people were so scared to say anything that they might accidentally suggest something that they didn't know perhaps was unlawful. And so they didn't want to feel scrutinized all the time. So the transparency only kicked in when a proposal got to the sort of beginnings of action, of actually starting to happen, and they were free to not disclose what happened before then. But the thing is that their notes-taking process didn't discriminate. It was just the whole thing. And they said that, well, to give those records that they were supposed to give up would require having the lawyers go over it and do this redaction process. And remember that redaction is all about, it's not about accountability, right? Most of the tools, the software tools that you pay or buy, you can even see it here in something as, just consumerish as Acrobat, right? You go mark something for redaction, you pick it, and then you say, apply redactions. What's it doing? Well, there's no accountability here, right? It's going through, looking in the metadata, looking in anywhere where maybe the document is saving some kind of undue version or some versioning. It wants to make sure that it's scrubbed completely out of the history and there's no way to ever connect what the actual information was back. And that is the principal focus of redaction products on the market, is to not leak the information. So what I'm talking about is something where at time of composition, people mark sensitive information and yet retain those certificates somewhere, and such that if they ever get called to share it, they need to be able to if the authority says, well, what was that? But this would allow something like that housing authority to be publishing their notes every day. And they could be conservative with that pen. They can run the pen through several layers of people and before it goes out to the public. But if you watch a steady stream, and as proposals are being implemented, and it's all black, and there's nothing that's not black, then you should start worrying. And Black Highlighter is about helping with that. And I'll just talk really briefly about the technical implementation side. I mentioned you don't need jQuery UI, for instance, to run it. It is built with jQuery, the widget. The Node.js side does not require jQuery, of course. It shouldn't. But the common code for both lives in the widget file. So it's one big, long jQuery UI file, very well documented with all the parts embedded in it, low dependencies, good comments, I think. And it's a very tricky thing to do. I will tell you, if you've never sat there and worked through different browsers with Content Editable and trying to do things like what you see this doing, it's actually pretty tricky. And I think that as jQuery UI widgets go, I've tried to learn what good is in that kind of questionable space of if there is such a thing as good. But let's assume there is. I've tried to follow best practices. And the server-side code is it shares all of that. As I mentioned, a lot of the encryption stuff is all done in the client without sending data to the server, and so that code which lives in the widget is actually reused by the server-side component in Node.js. And it also uses the QPromise library. For those of you who are strong advocates of promises, you will be happy to see that it is written with the try, then catch, finally structure of QPromises. So it's technically pretty much up to date, more or less. It could certainly use the eyes of a wiser Node.js person than me. This is my first Node.js program, although obviously not my first program. So yeah, I am interested to have any feedback or people forwarding this to the kinds of people who would care. I think that the most interesting places to apply this are any kind of maybe governmental organization that has a need to, on a daily basis, be publishing something, but sometimes they want to mark bits out, and yet they still want to hold on to the receipt, of what they said in case somebody comes along and says, what was that missing part? And it's a higher authority, and that they really do care about transparency. Because I think, like, for instance, in that housing authority issue with that activist, they were saying, oh, the lawyers, they're going to charge, tens of thousands of dollars. And it turns into this question of, the judge turning to the guy and going, well, why do you need this? And the why do you need this, maybe his accusations, sound crazy or antagonistic, especially when you're dealing with the court that, works with these people from the city every day. And so what does one guy mean to him? But the fact is he shouldn't have to prove anything to the judge about why he needs what he has the right to have. So that's why he was really asking us, the technologists, about, is there a way to make it so that at time of writing they can call out sensitive portions? And I say yes. And not only do I say yes, but I say that we can do this thing with the accountability in the loop as well. And that it's something that you can use on your blog. I've been doing some work on trying to put in blog comments so that instead of just having that part of your message where it says email address will not be revealed. I mean, what if I don't care if you reveal my email address, but there's some stuff I want to say and I want to get it published? whether the blog author approves it or not, and so I want to send that blog author all the protected parts. But then if they don't publish it, I might want to escalate. I might want to reveal those things. So some of these ideas could be adapted in many different circumstances. So I would love to hear anybody's creative ideas, and do get in touch. Brian at hostlefork.com. Thank you for watching.